Was there a need to remove Ingenious Hunter as a rune? To some degree, yes. So here's the issue with Ingenious Hunter. For those of you who don't know, Ingenious Hunter is the rune that made your item cooldowns get lower. Here's a question to think about is, if there is something in your game that is incredibly powerful and incredibly unpopular, is that good for the game? And then also, let's extend that. What if there is something that's incredibly powerful, incredibly unpopular, and not just powerful, but very unfair when you do take it? So as an example of this, you know, some people, what is that Sunfire Cape item? Is it Hollow Radiance? There's a lot of people who are saying like, Hollow Radiance sucks because its cooldown is too high, but it has to be high because if you take Ingenious Hunter, it's actually good, right? And that was probably actually to some degree true. It's like, oh, well, it's hard to tune Hollow Radiance's cooldown around people who don't take Ingenious Hunter, most of them, and the people who use the cheat code of taking Ingenious Hunter and then just win because they took Ingenious Hunter. And so Ingenious Hunter created this problem where it made it harder to tune item cooldowns, because if you took Ingenious Hunter, a lot of item cooldowns would go into degeneracy territory. But then at the same time, it wasn't something anybody took. And so basically you had this situation where a lot of characters and items potentially had to be balanced around a rune that nobody wanted to take. And so at that place, in that point, you kind of have to ask yourself the question of like, is that rune adding value or is it just creating balance problems, right? Another one like this was Minion Dematerializer. It's like, should a character's wave clear be balanced around the fact that if you're smart and take an unsatisfying rune, Minion Dematerializer, you can wave clear, and if you don't do that, you can't, right? Like, and so it's kind of a thing where it's like, what do you do as a designer about systems that kind of break patterns and are very powerful, but are very, very underpicked for whatever reason, usually due to a satisfaction kind of standpoint. And by the way, this is a slippery slope. The answer is not always we should change or remove these things. This can actually make your game worse. Let's use another example. Most active items are underutilized, meaning that most players, when they take an active item, forget to use it. So, the question then is, well, if players are buying active items and either never buying them or forgetting to use them, then like, are those items even balanced? Like, what happens when like a good player uses it, right? And an easy thing you could argue is, oh, then you should just delete all the active items, right? Because if no one uses them, then and like, why are they there, right? But on the flip side of that thing, the active items for the players who do use them are really cool. And honestly, a lot of active items for players who don't use them are really cool. Like, people will buy ZHONYA'S Hourglass, forget to use it, and they're still like, oh yeah, I love ZHONYA'S, right? And so it's not always the right solution to remove mechanics that are powerful but underutilized. Sometimes those mechanics add to the game, even if the end result is optimizing makes you OP. So, like, you know, it's not just a thing. This actually reminds me of a fun story. So we used to have an item called DEATHFIRE Grasp in the game. And remember, the core of this story is players don't use active items. So we had an item called DEATHFIRE Grasp in the game. You could click on someone and do a ton of damage to them and then burst them down with your mage. People love DEATHFIRE Grasp, but no one used it. It was a core item on a lot of characters, but they would forget to use it. And so when we decided to remove DEATHFIRE Grasp, a lot of the characters who it was a core item on were like, Riot, you're ruining my champion. How will I ever function? Every single DEATHFIRE Grasp user's win rate went up when we removed the item. Because it turns out that taking away an item that players kept forgetting to use ended up being a buff to those players. Another one that was like this was when Quicksilver Sash removed Zed ult. Quicksilver Sash used to remove all debuffs, and so you could counter Zed by getting a Quicksilver Sash and then using it to remove his ultimate. But here's the problem. Can anybody tell me the problem with that strategy? Buying a QSS against Zed? Can anybody guess why buying a QSS against Zed might not be the best decision? Anybody know? Anybody able to guess why that might be happening? Good. There's two reasons. One, remember, everybody forgets to use their actives. But the more important reason is it's magic resist. Congrats, you played yourself. To prevent the ultimate, you let him kill you without the ultimate because you didn't buy magic resist. And so what we saw when we removed QSS from ZULT, QSS against Zed, is two things. Number one is Zed's ban rate spiked to the moon because everybody was like, I can no longer counter this assassin. Riot has ruined League of Legends as Zed is even more unfair. Which, you know, that's a reasonable perception if you thought like QSS was a good counter item for him. Reasonable perception. And then the second thing that happened is Zed's win rate went down. Because people stopped buying an item that didn't give counter stats and then forgetting to use an item that didn't give counter stats against Zed. So kind of another example of like, hey, this active item was perceived to be powerful, it felt cool, it felt good, but actually, most of the time you shouldn't have been buying it. But again, that doesn't mean you shouldn't have active items, because QSS is a cool item, and you buy it sometimes when you need it, and it feels good if you use it right. And ZHONYA'S Hourglass is a cool item, and you buy it when you need it, and you feel good if you use it right? So there's definitely a slippery slope of you shouldn't just... It's not necessarily the correct design decision to look at something that is very strong and very underused and make the conclusion, oh, players don't get it, it shouldn't be here. It's all about cost and benefits, right? So then going back to Ingenious Hunter, if we talk about the cost and benefits, it would be like the cost was... It was creating these degenerate patterns with active items if players, you know, were in the know about it. It made it so certain active items or cooldown items couldn't really truly be balanced for anybody who didn't take Ingenious Hunter. And then the benefits of Ingenious Hunter were actually pretty low because of how few players used it. So there wasn't really many players being like, oh, this makes my character cooler. It was actually like, you know, more, you know, a very small number of, you know, Galaxy Brain folks. Whereas comparatively, DEATHFIRE Grasp, whether or not it was good on Veigar, because again, Veigar players kept forgetting to use it, Veigar players freaking loved DEATHFIRE Grasp. They bought it every game. When I was working on Nexus Blitz, I put DEATHFIRE Grasp back in the game. It was one of the most popular items in that mode. Because it turns out a lot of mage players look at DEATHFIRE Grasp and they're like, this is the coolest thing ever, even if they forget to use it most of the time. And so DEATHFIRE Grasp, I would argue, has a much higher benefit compared to the cost than like Ingenious Hunter in that case. QSS is also part of the most popular Zed Faker moment. Yeah, QSS was definitely good in that moment for sure. 100%. Will the boycott succeed in defeating Riot Games? A question I ask is always like, is there an actual boycott? Like, how many people are actually gonna boycott a thing when it comes to games? So what I mean by that is like, I don't know, as an example, when Rise became QE, man, there was a movement on the Rise main subreddit to be like, everybody needs to run it down as Rise. It's the plan. Because if we all run it down, we'll show everybody. And it's like, well, the Rise main subreddit is a group of very passionate Rise mains, but it is not like a large group of people who play Rise, right? And so say, as an example, any champion main subreddit saying like, we're going to boycott a thing and we're going to do something all together, very often isn't representative of how like the actual number and majority of people who are doing a thing. And so I think a question always to ask when it's like, actually this is the best one I would say. Let's see. This is a great image. Where is it? This is one of my most interesting images of all time. Boycott Modern Warfare 2. We want dedicated servers. So this is when the game came out, and you'll notice something. I think it's a little hard to read. Well, the image is pretty blurry, but all of these accounts say Modern Warfare 2. And so it's kind of a thing where whether or not this desire was relevant, which I think it was at the time, like it felt really bad when Modern Warfare 2 came out, as someone who played Modern Warfare and someone who played TF2, in terms of like the dedicated servers going away. That was always a fun place to build a community. It's just always a question of like, well, how many people are actually following through with that? Is that actually representative of like the player behavior, things like that? Yeah.